Hello, how are we? You doing well? Staying hydrated, staying healthy? I have to say, I've been here so far in Utah. It's my first time, and flying in from Germany, like everything's air conditioned in the U.S. It's a little chilly, but I love being here. I mean, there's mountains everywhere. It's absolutely beautiful. I also just quickly want to say thank you to the organizers for this conference. It has been just a pleasant experience so far. And the talks that we've seen as well. I mean, can we hear it for the speakers? Incredible, incredible. My name's Tejas, as he said, pronounced like contagious. A little bit of a learning device for you because it is an exotic name, if I may say so myself. If that's still a little bit hard to remember, just look in my general direction and say stuff, and I'll try and get it. Day to day, I work at a company in Germany, in Berlin, called Contiamo. And what we do is we interact with large sets of data to help our customers make better decisions. Really high level, what that looks like is if you're calling customer support, if they're using our tools, they'll probably know, okay, so it's the 8th time he's calling, and he's pretty upset, so let's give him something for free, right? We help our customers make better frontline operational decisions. And that usually involves working with a lot of data. Like one of our applications at any given time will show the result of a query returning like 16 million rows or so to a user. And so that's just really fun, I have to say. We build these apps, of course, with TypeScript, but ultimately everything becomes JavaScript, and that's where our applications run, in the browser. And because of the appreciation and the value that JavaScript has added to us and to me, I'm here to talk to you today about this idea of from you can't to you can, the welcoming nature of JavaScript. From you can't to you can, the welcoming nature of JavaScript. If I can get a quick show of hands, how many of you are JavaScript developers? Excellent, all of you. UtahJS. How many of you have ever felt judged for being a JavaScript developer? Yeah, I mean, part of this is some time ago, I went to a conference, and it was a multidisciplinary conference, and there were a lot of platforms. There was some native, there was some web, etc. Also, many different languages represented: Kotlin, Go, and whatsoever. I was part of the web platform group there, and for a lot of reasons I can't seem to understand, the web platform was seen as a young platform, and JavaScript in particular was by some seen as a language that is incredible for adding like spinning clocks to your cursor as you drag along the web page, right? It's seen as a language and as a tool that provides pretty good interactivity to web pages. But in terms of building systems at scale, oh no, let's do that with something else. And so the fact of the matter is, I think JavaScript has grown immensely since the earlier days. And so the talk today is to just reflect a little bit on the JavaScript of today. In fact, not just reflect on it, but celebrate it. I guess what I'm trying to say is about the perceptions of JavaScript is best summed up by this quote from a friend of mine. This is what he says. Like, I can't say what he said because it's not friendly. You tracking with that? Like, he didn't have nice things to say. Now, get this, what's really funny was he actually said this in a job interview with us. Well, what's really funny is that we hired him, and he's an excellent person, and we really work together well. I have to say, I really enjoy it, but by and large, as a backend engineer, the thought of JavaScript is, oh, that's nice to create click dummies, or a little bit more sophisticated applications. I'm here today to talk about the broad spectrum of things that JavaScript would allow you to create. Before we do that, I'd like to spend a few minutes quickly recapping where we find ourselves with JavaScript today. And it's important, I think, because context ultimately is king. And so if we think back to the earlier days, the time was prime, right, for this interactive dynamic language that would provide a layer of richness to web applications, or there's no concept of web applications, to web experiences that would drive the web forward. And so the way forward that we could see was Java applets. Java applets, woo, Java everywhere. The JVM is so portable, let's run Java applets everywhere, right? And meanwhile, on the other side was, at Netscape, was a man named Brendan Eich, whom all of us probably know as the father of JS, creating this language, which I've heard it referenced. I've heard it in a talk that it was like a 10-day hackathon where JavaScript was initially developed. It gained traction. Eventually, Microsoft noticed this traction and kind of created, I think it was called LiveScript, which is kind of like JavaScript. And there was a need for standardization, wherein the European Computer Manufacturers Association, also known as ECMA, decided, let's standardize this thing. And so Technical Committee 39 currently takes care of the standardization and the greenkeeping of the language, one of whose members is right here with us. And so that's where we find ourselves today. But the reason I bring that up is because we can't look past the fact that the initial JavaScript was a rushed to delivery, right? How many of you have written rush to deliver code? Yeah, so you know what that's like. But I'm here to submit to you the hypothesis, the idea that maybe what we would consider buggy or hacked together is actually one of the greatest accomplishments of engineering in our generation. And that's a big statement, but it's one I'll stand by. In fact, I would say JavaScript has a lot of intrinsic beauty that ought to be celebrated as really accessibility features. We've been talking about accessibility this whole morning. And I think JavaScript, in my opinion, that I'd like to share, is one of the most accessible languages that we have. And so what we'll do now is I'll just go briefly through some points about JavaScript that I think makes it a truly accessible and welcoming language. We'll talk about kind of how it's beginner-friendly and how it kind of takes you on this journey where it seasons you, like it literally encourages and builds you up as an engineer. And we'll talk about possibly some more advanced stuff towards the end. With that, let's just get right into it because we have a lot of ground to cover, and let's see if I can do this in 30 minutes. Number one, I can feel some of you TypeScript guys judging me, right? But I would say this feature of JavaScript has come under a lot of scrutiny. It's a language with a dynamic type system. What does that mean? That means you don't explicitly say, hey, this is a string, or this is a number. The language will kind of guess for you. And sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. I mean, the example here is clearly unintended by the developer in most cases. I would say, though, that this can be a really powerful feature of the language because it presents less beginner overhead. Like, you don't need to think about things like intersection types and unions and generics and interfaces. No, you just write code and get your stuff done. Some of my friends who are JavaScript developers today are former architects, like not software architects, but they build like buildings, are lawyers, are journalists who decided, I don't really feel my industry, I don't really feel what I studied to be my calling. I want to get into code. And I'll give you one guess, right, where they find their home. It's JavaScript. I would also say that dynamic typing in JavaScript is educational. And what that means is that it teaches you the need for static types. And so I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of emphasis on memorization over understanding. And what that means is you go to school, you ingest information, and then when you get into a career, you kind of just regurgitate what you learned. It's this way because it's this way because that's how we learned it. And I would submit to you that because of JavaScript's dynamic type system, what's going to happen is you'll write JavaScript to a certain point, and then sooner or later, maybe the type system can't keep up with what you're trying to do. At which point you'll understand, oh man, you know what would be really helpful at this stage? Static typing. And so then you'd get into TypeScript. You'd actually understand the need for this stuff. So you'd either use TypeScript, or if you're Facebook, you'd invent Flow. Moving on. JavaScript also gives you out of the box these declarative APIs. Like, we have things like array.find. You just give it a function and it does it. Like it doesn't really ask you to write implementations with for and loops and things. It abstracts that away and gives you a beautiful declarative API. In fact, we just got in the latest Chrome release array.flat map, and so you can just do these things without really worrying too much about the implementation details. More than that is you can trust JavaScript to handle that in the best and most efficient way possible. I would add, going back to dynamic typing for a second, that with it comes implicit coercion, which is a feature that a lot of people don't like, mainly because of the example. I mean, if we look at the slide here, 11 plus 1 is not 111, but what JavaScript is doing is it's essentially saying, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to add a string with a number. Okay, that doesn't work. So what it'll do is it'll convert the number to a string for you, essentially trying to help you. Like, people criticize this, but can I just say, like, I feel like the language gets me, whether it does it right or wrong. Like, if you take one thing away from this talk, let it be that JavaScript is your bro. Seriously, like, and moreover, you spend a lot of time writing less code. And again, for beginners, I think that is incredibly, incredibly helpful. About APIs, there's a quote from Crockford.com, which I think there's a lot of truth to. This is from Douglas Crockford, one of the pillars on which JavaScript stands, right? Author of JavaScript, The Good Parts, wrote YUI, which was the library of its time. Huge, huge respect for this man and his work. And this is, I think, where JavaScript was at some point, coupled with the DOM, what was called the horrendous API, although I would submit it's been improved significantly right now. We have document.querySelector, which is basically jQuery. There's a lot of confusion about where JavaScript ends and the DOM begins. I will confess here publicly that when I was a junior developer, even today, accidentally use window in a Node.js environment. There can be some confusion about where JavaScript ends and the DOM begins, but let me just say that where there's confusion, there's community. Where there's confusion, there's community. And so, I mean, I think of channels like Twitter, GitHub, Stack Overflow, where you're so free to ask a question, and then the JavaScript community will step in and help you out. While there can be some confusion among the APIs, I think the benefits outweigh the costs. I mean, you're able to do these operations kind of magically. I will say also, like, the initial slide deck for this talk, I've given this talk before, was speech activated. Why? Because I can. Like, the browser lets you use speech recognition. Like, it was literally following me as I talked. And I just did it as a little demo to show you the power of the APIs in JavaScript. JavaScript is also fully backwards compatible. I think this is incredible, because at Contiamo, we work with a lot of open source tools, and semantic versioning is fairly important to us, and so we try to minimize breaking changes and things. JavaScript, all valid ES5 is valid ES6. It just works. It's really backwards compatible, and a lot of times I hear criticism about this, not in the form of criticism. What does that mean? JavaScript is a little bit weird, right? I think all of us can agree that it has some quirks, particularly if you're in a browser console or in any JavaScript environment and you type of null, what you get is object. And at some point you go, wait, what? No, null's not an object, it's a null. JavaScript disagrees. And the reason for this is because it was just broken behavior that people started depending on, and to fix it would be to introduce essentially a breaking change. And so in order to maintain backwards compatibility, we still have some of those, which I think is a good decision. JavaScript is an open specification, meaning the language, the proposals, the upcoming features, the test suite, it's all on GitHub. It's fully transparent. It's fully open. And what that means is all of us in this room have the ability to influence and shape the language, literally by opening issues. That gives me a lot of hope, because if it ever is seen as a toy language for clocks, or like a little thing to introduce Clippy, you know, the little Microsoft Word dude into the browser, and that's your JavaScript, we're able to really affect it in a way that improves it for scalable applications. I think of also HTML and CSS, like these specifications that really are just valuable because they're so transparent. I would say JavaScript is incredible as well because it's a full stack language. It's the only language that I know of that can run on the client and on the server and on the database and literally everywhere. Like even on IoT, like there's another talk here today about the Internet of Things running JavaScript on kind of like devices other than computers, just like things. And JavaScript will run there too. I have a friend who works at medium.com, and she tells me, how many of you use medium.com actually? Right, she told me that medium.com's entire stack is JavaScript. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, every time someone tells me, oh, maybe let's not use JavaScript for the whole stack, I'm like, have you used medium.com? It can be done, and I think it is a valuable feature. The last thing I'll talk about with JavaScript, and it's just magic, is the idea that JavaScript is a portable language. And this was the appeal. I mean, we talked about the history, we talked about Java applets, we talked about the JVM being portable. Java has been criticized for, JavaScript rather, has been criticized for, it doesn't allow you to do performance-intense applications, right? It's garbage collected, it has a lot of engine optimizations and things that happen, and it's really hard to get that performance that you get closer to the metal. Do you know what I mean? And so JavaScript has been criticized for, for example, you can't create Final Cut Pro and run it in the browser, because editing 4K video in the browser is a little bit expensive, just a little bit. You can't have applications or video games in a JavaScript environment, because that's, it's a little bit slow. And that was true until, this thing happened, which WebAssembly is a complete game changer, right? It's this single compile target for low-level languages like C and C++ and Rust that literally allows you to write low-level machine code and run it in a JavaScript environment, the browser. What that means is you're literally able to create truly universal, performance-rich applications. Things like video. Can I just say, growing up, I was really jealous that I was a Mac user, and all my friends had Windows computers, and they were like, "Oh, have you played this new thing?" I'm like, "No, because I have a Mac." And I'd have to install Boot Camp, and it was a whole. Say goodbye to the platform problems with WebAssembly. In fact, it is so easy. This talk is about the welcoming nature of JavaScript. And can I just say, going from low-level code to running it in the browser with WebAssembly is incredibly easy. In fact, I'm gonna stop the slides right here. And actually, let's do something fun. Let's write a WebAssembly module and use it in JavaScript. I'll try and be really quick. This is really quick. This is a hello world. Don't get excited. Or maybe do get excited. I don't know. But let's do it. So I'll pull up my terminal. And what we'll do is we'll go bigger here. So can you all see that? I'll use a language called Rust because it's, in my opinion, it's just easier for me and is able to interop with JavaScript semantics fairly well. And so Rust has a package manager called Cargo. It's kind of like NPM. And I'll just say, let's create a new thing. Call it my WASM app. And I'll go in there and let's open up VS Code, my editor of choice. And what I'll do is this file is kind of like your package JSON. It just describes your project. And I'll say I depend on a library called WASM bindgen. And that's one guess what WASM bindgen is in Rust. Bindings for WebAssembly. Woo! So let's use version 0.2. Don't ask how I know this. I memorize stuff. And we'll also say that we're exporting a library, and it's a C dynamic library. I mean, this is just boilerplate, really. And what we'll do is we'll create a library file. Oh, thumbs up, nice. We'll create a library file that that essentially calls a JavaScript function from like low-level WebAssembly world. So let's do that. lib.rs is my Rust library. And if you've written JavaScript, the concepts are incredibly close. So we'll do an import statement, which in Rust is expressed like this, WASM bindgen. And we'll import all of the default exports from it. WASM bindgen. The prelude are the default exports in Rust. And what we'll do is we'll say we have something external, and this is where we'll describe the JavaScript function. We have a function called alert. How many of you are familiar with this function? It is, right, and so alert, what does alert do? It takes in a message, which is, in Rust, this is called a string slice. It's kind of like a string. And what we'll do is we need to annotate that. Good thing I remembered. WASM, bind gen. And that's important to tell Rust, hey, this is a WASM thing. We'll do that again. And now I'll write some Rust. I'll say I have a public function called say hello, help. And what it's going to do is it's going to call alert in the browser, and it's going to say hello from WebAssembly. And then we'll do a fire emoji because that's what front-end people do. There you go. All right, save. That's basically it, guys. We just wrote a WebAssembly module in Rust. Now what we got to do is compile it. We'll use a tool called WASM Pack by my friend Ashley G. Williams. WASM Pack, and we'll say init, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to compile to WebAssembly. It's going to use a whole bunch of dependencies that are abstracted away. Again, welcoming nature. And it's going to compile to WASM. This is going to take a while, so kind of off the main thread, what we'll do is we'll create an npm, create a node app. Let's just make a folder, call it test WASM. If I can type WASM, let's go with that. And I'll npm init with everything yes. It's just a node package, no big deal. And I'll install a tool chain that we use at Contiamo. Just helps. It just gives you a Webpack and all the things out of the box, operational scripts. And so now both these things are going to install. They're going to take up to 4 minutes. And so I think I can spend those 4 minutes talking while stuff's compiling. And so while that compiles, it might break as well because it's unstable and it's being worked on. In fact, go on GitHub and contribute. If it fails, don't worry. Like with TV Magic, I have a pre-baked module with the same code. Anyway, while that compiles away, I'd like to spend some time talking to you about my journey with JavaScript. In many ways, it's the journey of You Cant to You Can. You see, the general idea is JavaScript is this language where a lot of people said, well, you can't do multi-threading. Well, we kind of can. You can't do asynchrony. Well, it does it quite well. You can't. With JavaScript, you can. My journey is very similar. You see, I was born with a medical condition called hemophilia. And what that means is, once you start bleeding, you don't stop until you lose all of your blood and die, basically. And so I see some of you sitting there thinking, well, then just don't get cut. But might I submit to you, it is a little bit more complicated than that, because you have tiny little blood vessels inside you called capillaries. And what happens is, when you do anything, if you climb stairs, if you carry a backpack, in fact, if you've walked today, you've probably broken a few of those and started bleeding internally. The thing is, it stops so quickly for you that you don't really notice. For me, I've been in the emergency room literally by opening a heavy door, by climbing stairs, by carrying a backpack to school. In fact, I don't have a backpack with me at this conference. Anyway, and so the thing there is that you can see how that presents a lot of you can't. You can't play sports. You can't ride a bicycle. I only learned how to ride one this year. You can't. Moreover, there's medicine for this to treat the condition, to essentially stop the bleeding and save my life. That costs about that much, which I can't afford that. Even if I could, I probably shouldn't have to because it's a human right to sustain life, right? And so I literally couldn't do anything. I have a brother who's healthy, who went to school. My parents went to work. I would literally stay at home every day and kind of just try not to die. And not move and just not do much until my brother came to me after taking an HTML class and said, hey, here's some stuff I've learned. And I built some stuff with HTML, and I was going, whoa, you can actually build stuff and not get hurt? That's incredible. And so I was so moved by this idea of I can make stuff and be fine. Eventually, what happened was I started writing some code with JavaScript, and things got really well, and my parents did the best thing they knew what to do and put me in a class to learn object-oriented C++ at age 10. Look, I don't get it. I mean, I still have the piece of paper that says I finished it. I do not remember any of it. What I do remember is the compiler yelling at me as a 10-year-old. And I'm thinking, but I just want to make a program. is this something I can't do? I thought I could code, but I need to import. I don't get it. And so eventually I got back into JavaScript, and it was magical because guess what? It just literally like doesn't care about strings and numbers and types. Like it just changes types for me. It has APIs where I don't need to think about details. And so I start writing JavaScript, right? I start making a few websites, and there's a child making websites in the small town where I grew up. That was interesting. So made some news, eventually won an award, eventually interviewed for a position in Germany, moved over to Germany, and here, through JavaScript, here's what I pay for this medicine today. Right? That is, since then, I've been able to do sports. I learned to ride a bicycle. I've climbed. I have a standard of life that is so incredible that I'm so thankful for because of this language that is loosely typed, that is welcoming to beginners. I think JavaScript deserves. It is incredible. It is absolutely incredible. With that, let's take a look at that WASM thing. It should have broken by now. Let's see. So npm installed. Oh wow, my package published. I'm not surprised. Let's take a look at what happened. So what it did was it created this folder, package. This is literally an npm module with WebAssembly. In fact, if you look at the compiled WASM here, this is what it looks like, right? Who understands that? Not me. Although I do see the fire emoji with that thing. Invalid malloc. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to go in here and change the JS to just have a file extension for my module bundler. I'll also bump the version because I may have published this before. And so I'm going to actually do this as well so I don't pollute npm. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to publish this to npm right now if there's internet. So cd package, npm publish. Let's see if this works. Moment of truth. Conference internet's incredible. Oh my gosh, it published. All right, let's go to my front-end application. Let's make a source folder. Let's open the editor. This is so cool, guys. And then let's install my new WebAssembly module that I just published. Tejas Kumar, my WASM app. Let's remove that. Right, and it's going to install that. And while it installs, let's write some code that interacts with the WebAssembly code. What? Index.js. So here we go. We're going to import Tejas. That's my WASM app right there. And when it imports, I'm going to destructure the function that I exported, which is called say hello. And I'm going to call it. Isn't that crazy? Calling a function. All right, say hello. Done. And let's actually start my dev server. And what we should see is WebAssembly calling a JavaScript function. I mean, this is exciting stuff. So let's do it. I'm here in Chrome. Let's open up the, all right, ready? And, oh my gosh, look at that. I mean, so how's that WASM thing? It's working. It's still a work in progress. The bindings are still evolving. But the general idea is you can share code between low level and the browser. It's exciting. And so that's some ways that JavaScript is still this welcoming language, even to more advanced cases, like game development. I'm almost done, but I want to draw attention to two things, and then we'll wrap up. Number one, JavaScript is more than a language. JavaScript is a culture. JavaScript is community. JavaScript are the people I'm looking at right now. It is open source. It is welcoming. You guys have helped me in some way or the other live the life I have. And I just wanted to say thank you to the community and to the people involved. You also, I'd say, all of us in the community have this responsibility to keep the language welcoming, to keep it the language of you can. Right? We're all developers, and we want fancy new features, and we want new operators, and we want shared memory and atomics and things like this, which are wonderful. But at the same time, we need to remember to keep things approachable, because I believe that's an edge that JS has. This is a slide, and this is my final slide, from Brendan Eich, from one of his presentations about the modern web. And this is what he says about JavaScript. He says, always bet on JS. First, they said it wouldn't be useful for building rich internet applications. Then they said it couldn't be fast. Then they said it couldn't be fixed. Then they said it couldn't do multi-core GPU. And they were wrong every time. Where everyone said you can't with JavaScript, turns out you can't. And so his advice, my advice, our advice is always bet on JavaScript. Thank you very much. My name is Tejas Kumar. It is my honor to be here.